The security guard couldn't look me in the eye when he asked for my badge. I remember standing there in the lobby of Harrison and Cole, the same lobby I'd walked through for 11 years, and feeling like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body. My heels on the marble floor, the morning sunlight streaming through those massive windows, the receptionist pretending to be very busy with something on her computer screen. "Ms. Thornton, I'm going to need you to come with me," the guard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They want you to collect your things." They, such a small word to contain so much power. 30 minutes earlier, I had been a senior vice president. I had a corner office on the 23rd floor, a team of 47 people who reported to me, and a reputation as one of the most effective marketing executives in the financial services industry. Now I was being escorted out like a criminal. The cardboard box they gave me was too small. After 11 years, they handed me a box meant for copy paper and expected it to hold everything I'd built. I filled it with photographs, awards, the small succulent my daughter had given me for my first day as VP. The rest, the files, the presentations, the campaigns that had generated millions in revenue, that all belonged to them now. "We'll mail anything else," a woman from HR said. She was young, nervous, clearly not trained for this. "I'm sorry, Ms. Thornton, this must be difficult." Difficult, as if that word could capture what was happening, as if being erased could be described as merely difficult. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to demand to see the CEO, the board, anyone who could explain how I'd gone from exceeding every metric to unemployed in the span of a single morning meeting. But I already knew the answer. I'd known it the moment I walked into that conference room and saw who was sitting at the head of the table. Richard Ashford, the man who'd made my termination his personal mission for the past 18 months. The man who smiled at me now as if he'd won something precious. And maybe he had, but not for long. Let me take you back to the beginning, before Harrison and Cole, before Richard Ashford, before I learned what it truly costs to be a Black woman succeeding in spaces that were never designed for us. My name is Vivian Elise Thornton, and I grew up in a small brick house in Southside Chicago, the kind of neighborhood where front porches served as living rooms in the summer and everyone knew whose children belonged to whom. My father, Eugene Thornton, worked 32 years at the steel mill before it closed. My mother, Della, was a seamstress who could look at a dress in a magazine and recreate it stitch for stitch from memory. Together, they raised 4 children on combined incomes that never quite reached middle class, stretching every dollar until it screamed. "Vivian, you got a gift," my mother used to say, watching me organize my sister's closets by color and season when I was barely 10 years old. "You see how things should be, and you make them that way. That's gonna take you somewhere." I believed her. I had to believe her, because believing was the only currency we had in abundance. I worked my way through college waiting tables and tutoring other students in writing. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration and a minor in communications. My first job out of college was answering phones at a small advertising firm downtown. But within 3 years, I was managing accounts worth more than my parents had earned in their entire lives combined. I met my husband, Leonard, at a marketing conference in Atlanta. He was a software engineer with a quiet strength and a laugh that made you feel like everything would be okay. We married on a sunny October afternoon in my grandmother's backyard, with 75 guests and a cake my mother made from her own recipe. Our daughter, Zoe, came 2 years later, a bright-eyed baby who grew into an even brighter child, curious about everything, afraid of nothing. She had Leonard's analytical mind and my stubborn determination, a combination that would serve her well in a world that rarely made space for girls who looked like her. By the time I turned 35, I had everything I'd dreamed of: a loving family, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and a career that seemed to prove my mother right. I had made something of myself. I had escaped the gravitational pull of poverty and landed somewhere safe. Or so I thought. Harrison and Cole recruited me when I was 38. They were one of the largest financial services firms in the Midwest, and they were looking to diversify their leadership team. Those were the words they used: diversify. like I was a portfolio allocation rather than a person. But I didn't care about their motivations. I cared about the opportunity. Senior Director of Marketing with a clear path to VP within 3 years. A salary that made my eyes water when I first saw the offer. A chance to build something meaningful at a company with real resources. I accepted without hesitation. The first few years were everything I'd hoped for. I revamped their digital marketing strategy, increased brand awareness by 40%, and launched campaigns that won industry awards. My team grew from 12 people to 30, then 40. I was promoted to vice president, then senior vice president. I was the highest-ranking Black woman in the company's history. They put me in the annual report, featured me in recruitment materials, invited me to speak at conferences about diversity and inclusion. What they didn't tell me was that some people saw my success not as an asset, but as a threat. And the most dangerous of those people was about to become my boss. Richard Ashford arrived at Harrison and Cole in the spring of my 9th year with the company. He came from a competitor firm in New York, recruited to serve as chief marketing officer, my direct superior, the person who would control every aspect of my professional life. The announcement email praised his visionary leadership and transformative approach to brand strategy. What the email didn't mention was that Richard Ashford had never worked with a Black woman in senior leadership. What it didn't mention was that his previous company had settled 3 discrimination lawsuits out of court. What it didn't mention was that within 6 months, he would make destroying my career his primary objective. But I didn't know any of that yet. On the day he arrived, I was hopeful, cautiously optimistic, ready to impress my new boss with the same dedication that had earned me every promotion. I remember our first meeting with painful clarity. I'd prepared extensively, a comprehensive overview of our marketing initiatives, performance metrics, future projections. I arrived at his office 5 minutes early, portfolio in hand, wearing my favorite navy suit, the one Leonard always said made me look like I could run the world. Richard kept me waiting for 20 minutes. When he finally emerged from whatever he'd been doing, he looked at me with an expression I'd learned to recognize over the years. Not hostility, exactly. Something more insidious. A flicker of surprise, quickly concealed, as if he'd expected someone different. Someone who looked more like him. "Vivian," he said, not offering his hand. "Come in." His office was already decorated, I noticed. Photos of himself with various politicians and celebrities. Golf trophies. A framed letter from some Fortune 500 CEO praising his genius. The walls were a shrine to his own accomplishments. I sat across from his desk and began my presentation. I'd barely reached the 3rd slide when he interrupted. "I'm familiar with the basics," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "What I want to know is why our market share hasn't grown faster. We're leaving money on the table." Actually, our market share has increased by 12% over the past 3 years, which exceeds industry. Industry averages are for average companies. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those cold, gray eyes. "I was brought in to make us exceptional. That's going to require some changes." "Of course, I'm always open to new strategies." "Good, I'll be conducting a full review of the department over the next few months, evaluating personnel, processes, everything." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure someone with your background understands the importance of proving your value." My background. The words hung in the air, weighted with implication. "I'm confident my track record speaks for itself," I said carefully. "We'll see." He turned to his computer, a clear dismissal. I gathered my unused portfolio and walked out of his office with my head high and my stomach churning. The changes began slowly, subtly, in ways that were difficult to name, but impossible to ignore. Meetings I'd always attended were suddenly scheduled when I had conflicts. Emails about major initiatives arrived in my inbox hours after decisions had already been made. My budget requests, previously approved without question, now required extensive justification and were often denied. "It's just the new leadership style," I told Leonard one evening, pushing pasta around my plate without eating it. He's asserting control. It'll settle down once he realizes I'm on his side. Leonard looked at me with concern. Are you sure that's all it is? Because you haven't been sleeping, Vive. You're checking your email at midnight. That's not normal stress. It's fine, I said automatically. I've handled difficult bosses before. But Richard Ashford wasn't just difficult. He was strategic. In my 10th year at the company, he began restructuring the marketing department. Teams were reorganized, reporting lines redrawn. Every change seemed designed to diminish my authority while maintaining the appearance of collaboration. My largest account, a $5 million relationship I'd personally cultivated for 7 years, was transferred to a white colleague named Bradley Morrison. The explanation was that Bradley needed developmental opportunities. Never mind that I'd developed that account from nothing. Never mind that the client had specifically requested to continue working with me. This decision has been made at the highest levels, Richard said, when I requested a meeting to discuss it. I suggest you focus on the accounts you still have rather than dwelling on what's been reassigned. Richard, with all due respect, that account represents a significant portion of our revenue, and I have relationships with those clients that. Relationships can be rebuilt. Bradley is perfectly capable. I'm not suggesting he's incapable. I'm suggesting that this reassignment doesn't make strategic sense, and I'd like to understand the reasoning. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. The reasoning is that I'm the CMO and I've made a decision. Is that going to be a problem, Vivian? I recognized the trap. If I pushed back, I was difficult, aggressive, unable to work with leadership. If I acquiesced, I was compliant, accepting my own diminishment. No, I said quietly, it won't be a problem. Good. Now, I believe you have a department meeting to prepare for. Another dismissal, another small defeat. The worst part wasn't the professional undermining. The worst part was what it did to my sense of self. I started second-guessing everything. Was my presentation really as strong as I thought, or was Richard right that I was coasting on past successes? Were my ideas genuinely innovative, or had I become complacent? Was I being discriminated against, or was I using race as an excuse for my own shortcomings? These questions circled in my mind at 3 a.m., making sleep impossible. They followed me into meetings, making me hesitant when I should have been confident. They whispered in Richard's voice, telling me I wasn't good enough, had never been good enough, had only gotten this far because of quotas and diversity initiatives. I know now that this is how it works. This is how they break you. Not with obvious attacks that can be documented and reported, but with 1,000 tiny cuts that make you bleed out slowly, invisibly, until you start to believe you deserve it. But I didn't understand that yet. I was still trying to play by rules that had never been designed to let me win. The documentation started almost by accident. One Thursday evening, after a particularly demoralizing meeting where Richard had publicly criticized my team's campaign results that were actually above target, but apparently not transformative enough, I came home and sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my laptop. I needed to vent. I needed to process. So I opened a blank document and started typing. March 15th, team meeting, 2 p.m. Richard criticized Q1 campaign performance in front of entire department. Actual results, 14% above projected engagement, 8% increase in lead generation. Richard's characterization, disappointing and lacking creativity. No specific feedback on how to improve. Bradley Morrison's campaign, similar metrics, praised as exactly the kind of innovation we need. I kept typing, every slight I could remember from the past months, every reassigned account, every excluded meeting, every backhanded comment. By the time I finished, I had 4 pages of incidents I'd been trying to convince myself were coincidences. They weren't coincidences. Seeing them listed in black and white made the pattern undeniable. Leonard found me still at the table at midnight, staring at the screen. Vive, what are you doing? I turned the laptop toward him. He read in silence for several minutes, his expression growing darker with each scroll. "This is systematic," he said finally. "This is textbook discrimination." "I know, but knowing it and proving it are two different things. Everything he does is deniable. Business decisions, leadership discretion, performance concerns. He's smart, Leonard. He knows exactly how close to the line he can get without crossing it." "Have you talked to HR?" I laughed bitterly. HR reports to the CEO. The CEO recruited Richard personally. They golf together. They vacation together. Going to HR would be like going to the Fox to report a problem in the henhouse. Leonard sat down beside me, taking my hand. "What about a lawyer?" "And say what? That my boss is mean to me, that I don't get invited to meetings, that I feel like I'm being treated differently." I shook my head. "Without concrete evidence of discrimination, something he said or wrote that explicitly references race, it's my word against his. And we both know whose word carries more weight in that equation." We sat in silence for a long moment. "So what are you going to do?" Leonard asked. "I don't know. Keep my head down. Keep documenting. Hope he gets bored and moves on to someone else." I closed the laptop. "Or hope I'm wrong about all of this." But I wasn't wrong, and Richard Ashford wasn't going to get bored. He was just getting started. The ally I didn't expect came in the form of Margaret Chen, Richard's executive assistant. Margaret was a quiet woman in her 50s who'd been at Harrison and Cole for over 20 years. She'd worked for 3 CMOs before Richard and had seen the company through recessions, restructurings, and countless leadership changes. She was the kind of assistant who knew where all the bodies were buried but never said a word. Until one afternoon in late summer, when she appeared at my office door. "Ms. Thornton, do you have a moment?" I looked up from my computer, surprised. Margaret and I had always been cordial, but we'd never had a conversation beyond pleasantries. "Of course, come in." She closed the door behind her, unusual, and sat in the chair across from my desk. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, "and I need you to promise you didn't hear it from me." My heart began to beat faster. "Okay." "Mr. Ashford has been meeting with HR over the past few weeks. Private meetings, not on his official calendar. I only know because I handle the conference room bookings, and I noticed the pattern." "Meetings about what?" Margaret finally looked at me. Her expression was troubled, almost pained. "About you, about building a case for your termination. He's been asking them to review your personnel file, your performance reviews, anything that could be used to justify letting you go." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. "On what grounds? My performance reviews have been excellent for 11 years. "I don't know the specifics, but I overheard him on a call last week." She hesitated. "He didn't know I was still in the office. He said something about how it was time to clean house and that the company needed leaders who fit the culture. He said you were a remnant of the old diversity push and that your aggressive attitude was creating problems." Aggressive. The word hit me like a slap. I'd heard it before, always applied to Black women who dared to be confident, who advocated for themselves, who refused to shrink. Did he use any other language? Anything specifically about race? Margaret shook her head. "Nothing that explicit, he's careful. But Ms. Thornton, I've worked here for 22 years. I've seen how they push people out. The pattern is always the same: isolation, criticism, restructuring, and then termination for cause based on manufactured performance issues." She leaned forward. "They're building a paper trail against you. You need to build one too." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You could lose your job." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Because I have a daughter. She just started her first corporate job last year. She looks a lot like you, young, ambitious, ready to take on the world." Her voice wavered. "I want to believe she'll be treated fairly. But if women like you can be destroyed by men like Richard Ashford, what chance does she have?" She stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. "I should go. Please don't tell anyone we spoke." "Margaret, thank you." She nodded once and slipped out of my office, leaving me alone with the weight of what she'd revealed. That night, I called the only lawyer I knew personally, my college roommate's husband, Derek Williams, who practiced employment law in the city. "Vive, what you're describing sounds like potential racial discrimination," he said after I'd laid out the situation. "But Margaret's right. Without documented evidence of discriminatory intent, it's going to be hard to prove." "So what do I do?" "Keep documenting everything. Every meeting, every comment, every decision that seems racially motivated. Save copies of your performance reviews, your achievements, any emails that contradict the narrative they're building. And Vive." "Yes." "Prepare yourself. If they've already started building a case, they're probably going to move fast. You might have weeks, not months." I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of my bedroom. 11 years. I'd given them 11 years of my life, my creativity, my dedication. And now they were going to throw me away like I was nothing. Unless I found a way to fight back. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in survival. I arrived at work every day with my armor on, a pleasant smile, impeccable professionalism, and a growing file of documentation saved to 3 separate locations. My personal laptop, a cloud storage account Leonard had set up, and a password-protected folder on my phone. Every email that excluded me from meetings I should have attended. Screenshot. Every budget cut to my team while Bradley Morrison's department received increases. Documented. Every time Richard praised mediocre work from white colleagues while dismissing excellence from my team. Written down with dates, times, and witnesses. I became a detective in my own workplace, gathering evidence of my own destruction. But I also started reaching out, carefully, quietly, to others who might understand what I was experiencing. There was Angela Rodriguez, a Latina director in finance who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of less qualified candidates. There was James Okonkwo, a Nigerian-American senior analyst whose ideas were routinely attributed to his white colleagues in meetings. There was Priya Sharma, a brilliant strategist who'd been told she needed to be less intense if she wanted to advance. We started meeting for coffee off-site, sharing our experiences in hushed voices like conspirators. And the more we talked, the clearer the pattern became. "It's not just Richard," Angela said one afternoon, stirring her latte with more force than necessary. "It's the whole system. He's just the one willing to do the dirty work." "The question is what we do about it," James added. "We can document until we're blue in the face, but without power, what good does it do?" I didn't have an answer, not yet. The end came faster than even Derek had predicted. On a Monday morning in October, I received a calendar invitation from HR for a meeting that afternoon. Performance discussion was the subject line, no additional details. I knew. I called Leonard from the parking garage, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "It's happening," I said, "today. Do you want me to come there?" "No, I need to handle this myself. But Leonard, if this goes the way I think it will, I need you to know something." "What?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not going to let them break me. Whatever happens in that room, I'm going to walk out with my head high, and then I'm going to fight." There was a pause. When Leonard spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "That's my Vivian. Give them hell, baby." The conference room was on the 24th floor, one level above my office, as if to remind me of the hierarchy I'd failed to conquer. Richard sat at the head of the table, flanked by the HR director and the company's general counsel. 3 against 1. "Vivian, please sit down," Richard said, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the table. The distance was deliberate. Everything about this was deliberate. I sat, folding my hands in my lap to stop them from trembling. "I'll get straight to the point," Richard continued. "After extensive review of your performance over the past 18 months, we've made the decision to terminate your employment with Harrison and Cole, effective immediately." The words landed like physical blows, even though I'd been expecting them. "On what grounds?" My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "Performance concerns, failure to meet expectations, inability to adapt to new leadership direction. Richard recited the list as if reading from a script, which, of course, he was. We've documented numerous instances of substandard work product and resistance to feedback. I'd like to see that documentation. He smiled. You'll receive a full summary in your termination package. And my performance reviews. The ones that rated me exceeds expectations every year for a decade. Historical performance doesn't guarantee future results. The company's needs have evolved, and unfortunately, your capabilities haven't evolved with them. I looked at the HR director, a woman named Susan Kellogg whom I'd known for years. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Susan, you know my record. You know what I've contributed to this company. Is this really how you want to handle this? Susan shifted uncomfortably. Vivian, I understand this is difficult, but the decision has been made at the executive level. My role is simply to ensure the transition is handled professionally. Professionally, the word was obscene in this context. So I have no recourse, no opportunity to respond to these alleged performance concerns. You're welcome to file an appeal through the standard HR process, Richard said smoothly. Though I should mention that our legal team has reviewed this matter thoroughly, and they're confident the termination is fully compliant with all applicable laws and policies. There it was, the threat barely concealed. Don't even think about suing us. We've already covered our bases. I looked at Richard, really looked at him, and saw exactly what he was. A small man with big power, using that power to crush anyone who made him feel inadequate. He wasn't evil, exactly. He was something worse, ordinary. One of countless mediocre men who'd risen to the top by pushing down anyone who threatened to outshine them. I understand, I said quietly. May I ask one question before I go? Richard's smile widened, confident in his victory. Of course. Do you honestly believe you're better at this job than I am? That Bradley Morrison, with his recycled ideas and his country club connections, is more valuable to this company than someone who increased revenue by 40% over 10 years. I paused, letting the question hang in the air. Or is this about something else entirely? Richard's smile faltered. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of something behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, that I knew exactly what he was doing, that I wasn't fooled. I'm not sure what you're implying, he said carefully. But I'd advise you to be very thoughtful about any allegations you might be considering. This company has substantial resources to defend itself against baseless claims. I'm sure it does. I stood, gathering my dignity around me like armor. I'll be consulting with my attorney about next steps. In the meantime, I assume you'll provide me with copies of all documentation related to this decision, as required by law. The general counsel nodded stiffly. You'll receive everything within 5 business days. I look forward to reviewing it. I walked out of that conference room without looking back, down the elevator, through the lobby, past the security guard who still wouldn't meet my eyes. And when I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel and let myself cry, not from defeat, but from the release of tension I'd been carrying for 18 months. The waiting was over. The pretending was done. Now the real work could begin. The first week after my termination, I did nothing. I couldn't. I lay in bed until noon, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of those final 18 months. Had I missed something? Was there a move I could have made that would have changed the outcome? Could I have been more strategic, more political? More willing to play the games that people like Richard Ashford played so effortlessly? Leonard brought me meals I barely touched. Zoe, home from college for fall break, hovered in my doorway with worried eyes, not knowing what to say. My mother called every day, her voice filled with a fierce protectiveness that made me feel like a child again. Baby, you rest now, she said. But don't you stay down too long. Thorntons don't stay down. We get back up and we get back to work. She was right, of course. She was always right. But getting back up required a strength I wasn't sure I still possessed. On the 8th day, Derek Williams called. Vive, I've reviewed the documentation they sent over. The termination letter, the performance reports, all of it. And, It's thin, very thin. They've manufactured a paper trail, but it's inconsistent with your historical reviews. Any halfway competent employment attorney would see through it in a heartbeat. I sat up in bed for the first time in days. So we can sue. We can definitely sue. But I want you to think carefully about what that means. Litigation against a company like Harrison and Cole could take years. They have a legal team with unlimited resources. They'll drag it out, try to exhaust you financially and emotionally. Even if we win, you'll be tied up in court instead of moving forward with your life. So what are you suggesting? Derek was quiet for a moment. I'm suggesting you consider all your options. A lawsuit is one path, but there might be others that serve you better in the long run. After we hung up, I sat with his words. Other options. What other options did I have? My entire career had been building toward that corner office, that title, that seat at the table. Without Harrison and Cole, who was I? The answer came to me slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. I was still Vivian Thornton. I was still the woman who'd turned a 12-person team into 47. Still the strategist who'd generated millions in revenue. Still the leader who'd mentored dozens of young professionals, many of whom had gone on to impressive careers of their own. Harrison and Cole hadn't made me. I had made Harrison and Cole better. And if they were too blind to see my value, maybe it was time to show the world what I could do without them. The idea crystallized over the following weeks. I started reaching out to former colleagues, former clients, former mentees, anyone who'd witnessed my work and might be willing to vouch for it. The response was overwhelming. Emails and calls poured in, expressing shock at my termination and anger at the injustice. "Vivian, this is insane," said Marcus Webb, a client I'd worked with for 7 years. "You're the reason we stayed with Harrison and Cole. If you're starting something new, I want to be part of it." "Whatever you're building, count me in," said Tanya Jefferson, a former mentee who now ran marketing for a tech startup. "You taught me everything I know. It's time I return the favor." But the call that changed everything came from Angela Rodriguez. "Vivian, I quit." "What?" "I couldn't stay there after what they did to you. None of us could. James resigned yesterday. Priya gave notice this morning. We've been talking and—" She paused. "We want to come work for you." "Angela, I don't have a company. I don't have funding. I don't have anything except a laptop and a lot of anger." "Then let's build something together. The 4 of us. You, me, James, Priya. We have over 60 years of combined experience. We have contacts in every major industry. We have skills that companies pay millions for." Her voice grew fierce. "And we have something else. We have a story. A story about what happens when talented people of color are pushed out of corporate America. Do you know how many potential clients would want to work with a company founded on those principles?" I felt something stir in my chest, a flicker of the fire that had been extinguished when I walked out of Harrison and Cole. "You're talking about starting a consulting firm." "I'm talking about starting a movement. Marketing, branding, strategy, but with a mission. A company that proves diversity isn't just a checkbox. It's a competitive advantage." I was silent for a long moment, my mind racing through possibilities. "We'd need capital, office space, technology infrastructure." "We'd need a business plan," Angela countered, "which I happen to have started drafting. James has connections to several angel investors who focus on minority-owned businesses. Priya's already designed a preliminary brand identity." She laughed. "We've been busy, Vivian. We were just waiting for you to be ready." That night, I sat with Leonard at our kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand, and told him everything. "They want to start a company," I said, "with me as the founder and CEO." Leonard was quiet, processing. "That's a big risk, Vive. We have savings, but starting a business from scratch, there are no guarantees." "I know, but there are no guarantees in corporate America either. I played by all their rules for 20 years, and they still threw me away the moment I became inconvenient." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm tired of building other people's empires, Leonard. I want to build my own." He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face as if seeing something new there. "You're going to do this whether I approve or not, aren't you?" I'm going to do this because I have to. Because if I don't, they win. Richard Ashford wins. Every person who ever looked at me and saw my skin color before my capabilities wins. I squeezed his hand. But I'd rather do it with your blessing. Leonard smiled. That warm, steady smile that had anchored me for 23 years of marriage. Baby, you've had my blessing since the day I met you. Go build your empire. I'll be right here cheering you on. We launched Thornton Collective on a rainy Tuesday morning in January, exactly 3 months after my termination from Harrison and Cole. The name was Angela's idea. It's not just about you, she'd said during one of our countless planning sessions. It's about all of us. Everyone who's been pushed out, overlooked, underestimated. We're building something collective, a place where talent matters more than pedigree. Our first office was a converted warehouse space in the Arts District, leased month to month because we couldn't afford a long-term commitment. The furniture was second-hand, the technology was refurbished, and the coffee machine was a relic from James's garage that somehow still worked. But the energy was electric. There were 4 of us at the beginning, me, Angela, James, and Priya, working 18-hour days, surviving on takeout and determination. We divided responsibilities based on our strengths. I handled overall strategy and client relations. Angela managed operations and finance. James oversaw data analytics and research, and Priya led creative development. We had no clients, no revenue, no reputation outside the networks we'd built over our individual careers. What we had was a story, and in the age of social media, a story was worth its weight in gold. The article came out 6 weeks after our launch. Tanya Jefferson, my former mentee, now a marketing director with media connections, had introduced me to a journalist named Rachel Torres who covered business and diversity issues for a major online publication. Rachel was intrigued by our origin story. 4 executives of color who'd left corporate America after experiencing discrimination, banding together to build something better. This isn't just a business story, Rachel told me during our interview. This is a cultural moment. People are hungry for alternatives to the old corporate model. They want to see proof that there's another way. The headline read, "Fired for being black, she built a company that's redefining success. The rise of Thornton Collective." The article went viral. Within 48 hours, we'd received over 2,000 inquiries through our website. Interview requests from podcasts, news outlets, and industry publications flooded my inbox. Our social media following exploded from a few hundred to nearly 50,000. More importantly, the phone started ringing with potential clients. The first was Marcus Webb, true to his word. He brought his entire account, a $3 million engagement, from Harrison and Cole to Thornton Collective, citing his belief in our mission and his respect for my work. His defection sent shockwaves through the industry. "This is just the beginning," Marcus told me over dinner after signing the contract. "There are a lot of companies out there looking for partners who understand diverse markets. Harrison and Cole never got it. They saw diversity as a PR strategy, not a business imperative. You understand the difference." The second client was a tech startup led by a young black woman named Destiny Williams. She'd read the article and immediately reached out. "I've been burned by agencies that didn't understand my audience," she said during our initial call. "They kept trying to make my brand more mainstream, which is code for more white. I need a partner who gets it." "We get it," I assured her. "That's why we exist." By the end of our first quarter, Thornton Collective had 7 clients and nearly $2 million in contracted revenue. By the end of the second quarter, we'd hired 12 additional employees, all recruited from networks of talented professionals who'd been undervalued at traditional firms. We were growing faster than any of us had imagined possible. But growth brought its own challenges. The bigger we got, the more attention we attracted, not all of it positive. Industry competitors dismissed us as a niche agency capitalizing on social trends. Anonymous commenters on business forums questioned whether we'd earned our success or simply benefited from diversity sympathy. And then there was Harrison and Cole. Richard Ashford, apparently, did not appreciate being publicly humiliated. The article had mentioned him by name. Rachel had done her homework and uncovered several former employees willing to speak about his management style. The picture painted was not flattering. 6 months after our launch, I received a letter from Harrison and Cole's legal team. They were accusing Thornton Collective of misappropriating proprietary information, poaching clients, and engaging in tortious interference with their business relationships. "They're trying to bury you in legal fees," Derek said when I called him in a panic. "Classic intimidation tactic. They know they can't actually prove any of this, but they're betting you can't afford to fight." Can they do this? Can they just make up accusations and sue us? Anyone can sue anyone for anything. The question is whether it holds up in court. Derek paused. "But Vive, there's another play here. Remember all that documentation you gathered before they fired you?" "Of course. I think it's time to use it, not just to defend against this lawsuit, but to file a counterclaim. Racial discrimination, wrongful termination, and now retaliatory litigation designed to harm a minority-owned business." I could hear the smile in his voice. "They opened this door. Let's walk through it." The next few months were brutal. Depositions, discovery requests, legal bills that made my eyes water. There were days when I questioned whether any of this was worth it, whether I should just settle, sign whatever they wanted, and focus on building the business. But every time I considered giving up, I thought about Margaret Chen, risking her job to warn me. I thought about Angela, James, and Priya, who'd bet their careers on this vision. I thought about every young professional of color who saw Thornton Collective as proof that another path was possible. I couldn't let them down. I couldn't let myself down. "We're going to win this," I told my team during a particularly difficult week. "Not just survive it, win it. And when we do, Harrison and Cole is going to regret ever underestimating us." Priya looked up from her laptop with a fierce grin. "That's the Vivian Thornton I know. What do you need from us?" "Everything you've got. We're not just building a company anymore. We're building a case. And when this is over, the whole world is going to know exactly what Richard Ashford did and exactly what we're capable of." The trial began on a crisp Monday morning in October, exactly 2 years after I'd been escorted out of Harrison, and Cole with a cardboard box of memories. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to my first meeting with Richard Ashford, dry-cleaned, pressed, and carrying a very different energy now. Leonard walked beside me, his hand steady on the small of my back. Behind us came Angela, James, and Priya, followed by Derek and his legal team. We looked like an army. That was deliberate. The media presence was overwhelming. Rachel Torr's original article had sparked ongoing interest in our story, and the lawsuit had only intensified the spotlight. Cameras flashed as we climbed the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. "Ms. Thornton, is it true you're seeking $50 million in damages?" "Ms. Thornton, do you have a message for Richard Ashford?" I kept walking. There would be time for messages later. Inside the courtroom, Richard Ashford sat at the defense table, flanked by a team of expensive attorneys in identical dark suits. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, more drawn, as if the past 2 years had aged him a decade. "Good." Our case was built on 3 pillars: racial discrimination, wrongful termination, and retaliatory litigation. Derek had assembled a mountain of evidence: my documentation, testimony from former colleagues, expert analysis of Harrison and Cole's patterns of promoting and firing employees of color. But the centerpiece of our case was something we'd discovered during the discovery process, buried in thousands of pages of internal communications. An email chain between Richard Ashford and the CEO, dated 1 week before my termination. The subject line read, "Thornton situation, final resolution." In it, Richard wrote, "We need to move quickly on this. The longer she stays, the more she infects the culture with her diversity agenda. I've built a sufficient paper trail to justify termination for cause. Legal has signed off. Recommend we execute by end of month before she becomes even more entrenched. The CEO's response: agreed, handle it quietly. We can't afford the optics of another discrimination claim, so make sure everything is documented properly. Maybe offer a generous severance to keep her quiet. When Derek read those emails aloud in court, I watched Richard's face drain of color. His attorneys objected, argued about context, claimed the language was being misinterpreted. But the jury heard what they heard. Infects the culture. Diversity agenda. Keep her quiet. The words hung in the courtroom air like smoke, impossible to unsee. I took the stand on the third day of the trial. Derek led me through my career history, the achievements, the accolades, the 11 years of excellence at Harrison and Cole. Then he walked me through the 18 months under Richard's leadership, the exclusion, the undermining, the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. Ms. Thornton, Derek said finally, can you describe how you felt when you were terminated? I looked at the jury, 12 ordinary people tasked with weighing my truth against a corporation's lies. I felt erased, I said quietly. I had given that company 11 years of my life. I'd sacrificed time with my family, missed my daughter's school events, worked weekends and holidays. I generated millions in revenue, mentored dozens of employees, won awards that they proudly displayed in their lobby. I paused. And in one meeting, they reduced all of that to a cardboard box and a security escort. Did you believe your termination was related to your race? Objection, Richard's attorney interrupted. Calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, Derek said smoothly. Ms. Thornton, based on your observations and experiences, did you perceive any connection between your race and how you were treated? Yes, I took a breath. I was the highest-ranking Black woman in the company's history, and from the moment Richard Ashford arrived, he made it clear that my presence was a problem he intended to solve. Not because my work was inadequate, the metrics prove otherwise, but because my success challenged his assumptions about who belongs in leadership. What assumptions? That certain positions are reserved for certain people, that diversity is a favor to be tolerated, not a strength to be embraced. I looked directly at Richard for the first time. That a Black woman from Southside Chicago couldn't possibly be as capable as a white man from privilege. Richard's expression remained carefully neutral, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or recognition that his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. The cross-examination was brutal, as expected. Richard's attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Victoria Hartwell, attacked every aspect of my credibility. She suggested I was bitter, opportunistic, playing the race card for financial gain. She pointed to minor inconsistencies in dates, attempted to reframe my documentation as evidence of paranoia rather than discrimination. Isn't it true, Ms. Thornton, that your performance did decline during Mr. Ashford's tenure? My performance remained consistently above target, as documented in the metrics I provided. But Mr. Ashford perceived it differently. Mr. Ashford perceived a Black woman succeeding in a space he believed she didn't belong. That's not a performance issue. That's a bias issue. Victoria pressed on, but I held my ground. Every accusation she threw, I countered with facts. Every insinuation, I deflected with truth. By the time she finished, I was exhausted, but intact. The other witnesses strengthened our case exponentially. Angela testified about patterns of discrimination she'd observed throughout her career at Harrison and Cole. James provided data analysis showing that employees of color were promoted at half the rate of their white counterparts and terminated at nearly double the rate. Priya shared her own experiences of being marginalized despite consistent excellence. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Margaret Chen. She'd been subpoenaed by our legal team, and Harrison and Cole's attorneys had fought viciously to exclude her. But the judge allowed her testimony, and Margaret took the stand with visible terror but unwavering resolve. I worked for Richard Ashford for 3 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw how he treated employees of color differently. The casual comments about cultural fit, the meetings scheduled to exclude certain people, the way he would praise mediocre work from white employees while criticizing excellent work from black and brown staff. Did you ever witness him make explicitly racial comments? Margaret nodded slowly. Once, about a month before Ms. Thornton's termination, I was in his office organizing files, and he was on the phone with someone from the executive team. He said. She paused, her hands trembling. He said he was tired of the diversity experiment and that it was time to restore proper standards to leadership. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Did you report what you heard? No, I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of what he could do to me. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Miss Thornton. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have been braver. You're speaking now, I said softly. That's what matters. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, I gripped Leonard's hand so tightly I'm sure I left bruises. The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, stood and faced the judge. In the matter of Thornton versus Harrison and Cole, on the count of racial discrimination, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Relief flooded through me. On the count of wrongful termination, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Angela grabbed my other hand, squeezing. On the count of retaliatory litigation, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The judge nodded. And the damages? We award the plaintiff $32 million in compensatory and punitive damages. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for the doors. Richard Ashford sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I simply turned to look at the man who tried to destroy me, and I smiled. Not a smile of vengeance, a smile of victory. The verdict made national news. Black executive wins landmark discrimination case against Fortune 500 firm, read the headlines. Thornton Collective founder awarded $32 million in historic ruling. Richard Ashford resigns in disgrace following jury's damning verdict. That last headline gave me particular satisfaction. Richard Ashford had submitted his resignation the day after the verdict, citing personal reasons. Within a week, Harrison and Cole's stock had dropped 18%. Within a month, 3 board members had stepped down, and the company had announced a comprehensive review of their diversity and inclusion practices. Too little, too late, but at least it was something. The money was life-changing, of course. $32 million, more than I could have earned in a lifetime at Harrison and Cole, even if I'd made it to the C-suite. But the money wasn't why I'd fought. I'd fought for vindication, for validation, for every black woman who'd ever been told she was too aggressive, too ambitious, too much, and who'd believed it. I'd fought to prove that our stories matter, that our excellence deserves recognition, that the systems designed to keep us small can be dismantled, one verdict at a time. And I'd won. 5 years have passed since that day in the courtroom. Thornton Collective now employs over 200 people, with offices in Chicago, Atlanta, New York, and Los Angeles. We've worked with Fortune 500 companies, tech startups, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies. Our client list reads like a who's who of brands that understand the power of authentic, diverse marketing. But the numbers don't capture what we've really built. We've built a training program for young professionals of color, providing mentorship and development opportunities that traditional corporations often deny them. We've built partnerships with HBCUs, recruiting talented graduates who might otherwise be overlooked by mainstream agencies. We've built a culture where excellence is recognized regardless of what you look like, where ideas are valued based on their merit, where people can bring their whole selves to work without fear. Angela is now our Chief Operating Officer, running day-to-day operations with the precision and passion she's always possessed. James leads our research division, using data to expose disparities and drive change. Priya has become one of the most sought-after creative directors in the industry, winning awards that major agencies would kill for. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. And every day, I wake up grateful for the journey that brought me here, even the painful parts. Last month, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was a retirement community in Florida. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. I almost threw it away, assuming it was junk mail. But something made me open it. Dear Miss Thornton, you don't know me, but I know you. I was the HR director at Harrison and Cole during your termination. My name is Susan Kellogg. I've followed your story over the years, the lawsuit, the verdict, the success of Thornton Collective, and I've carried a weight of guilt that I can no longer bear in silence. I knew what Richard Ashford was doing to you. I saw the manufactured performance reports, the strategic exclusions, the paper trail designed to justify your removal. I was in those meetings. I signed off on those documents. I told myself I was just doing my job, following orders, protecting my own position. But I was complicit, I was a coward, and I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do to undo the harm I caused. But I wanted you to know that watching your success has been a form of penance for me. Every time I see your name in the news, I'm reminded of what happens when good people stay silent, and what's possible when brave people speak up. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from all of us. With deepest regret, Susan Kellogg. I sat with that letter for a long time, feeling things I couldn't quite name. Anger, yes. Susan's silence had been costly. Her complicity had enabled my destruction. She could have spoken up, could have documented what she saw, could have been a Margaret Chen instead of a bystander. But also, compassion. Susan had been trapped in the same system that trapped so many of us. She'd made choices born of fear, choices she now had to live with. Her regret was real. Her guilt was genuine. I wrote back, Dear Susan, thank you for your letter. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt to know that you saw what was happening and chose silence. It does hurt. It always will. But I also know that courage isn't easy. Standing up against power comes with costs that not everyone is prepared to pay. I don't excuse your choices, but I understand them. What matters now is what we do with our remaining time. You say watching my success has been penance. I'd suggest a different framing. Let it be inspiration. Use whatever influence you have left to support those who are fighting the battles you didn't fight. Speak up now, even if it's late. Mentor young women who are facing the same obstacles. Turn your regret into action. That's the only redemption any of us can offer, not to undo the past, but to shape a better future. With hope. Vivian Thornton. Last week, I stood at a podium before 3,000 attendees at the National Business Leadership Conference. The topic was From Victim to Victory, Building Success After Setback. The audience was a sea of faces, young entrepreneurs, seasoned executives, students just beginning their journeys. Many of them were Black and brown. Many of them were women. Many of them had experienced versions of my story. I stand before you today as proof of something that should be obvious, but often isn't. I began. Your circumstances do not determine your destiny. The obstacles placed in your path are not permanent. The people who try to diminish you do not get to define you. I paused, looking out at the crowd. I was fired for being Black. That is a fact. A corporation with billions of dollars decided that my skin color mattered more than my contributions. They built a case against me, manufactured evidence, and threw me away like I was nothing. Silence, complete absolute silence. But here's what they didn't understand. You cannot destroy someone who knows their own worth. You cannot silence someone who has found their voice. And you cannot defeat someone who turns their wounds into weapons. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunder that shook the room. I didn't build Thornton Collective to prove anything to Richard Ashford or Harrison and Cole. I built it because I refused to let their limitations become my limitations. I built it because there were people who believed in me when I stopped believing in myself. I built it because every closed door is just an invitation to construct a better building. I leaned into the microphone. If you're sitting in this audience carrying rejection, carrying discrimination, carrying wounds that feel too deep to heal, hear me now. That pain is not your ending. It's your beginning. The very thing they used to try to destroy you can become the foundation of something extraordinary. You are not what they called you. You are what you choose to become. Now go out there and build your empire. As I sit here now, in my corner office at Thornton Collective, I can see the Chicago skyline stretching toward the horizon, a landscape of possibility that once felt closed to someone like me. On my desk sits a photograph from my daughter Zoe's graduation from business school. She's now a vice president at a tech company that values her brilliance, working in a culture our generation helped create. Beside it is a framed copy of the original article that launched our story into the world. And next to that, a small card my mother gave me before she passed last year, written in her careful handwriting. I always knew you'd make something beautiful from the broken pieces. She was right, Mama. You were always right. The journey from that cardboard box to this corner office wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to give up, nights I cried myself to sleep, moments I questioned whether fighting was worth the cost. But I kept going, not because I was extraordinary, but because I refused to let their narrative be the final word. And that's the message I want to leave with you today. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to keep going, keep documenting, keep building. Keep believing that the story they're trying to tell about you is not the story you have to accept. So I ask you, what story are they trying to tell about you? What labels have they attached to your name? What limitations have they placed on your potential? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Maybe you're not ready to start a company. Maybe your revolution looks like speaking up in a meeting, or documenting a pattern, or supporting someone else's fight. Maybe your empire is your family, your community, your own peace of mind. Whatever it is, build it with intention. Build it with integrity. Build it knowing that every brick you lay is a refutation of everyone who ever told you that you couldn't. If my story has touched you, if any part of this journey resonates with your own, drop a comment below. Tell me what you're building. Tell me what obstacles you're facing. Tell me what gives you hope. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like ours need to travel. They need to reach the person sitting alone tonight, wondering if change is possible. It is. I'm living proof. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Until next time, this is Vivian, reminding you. They can take your job. They can take your title. They can take your corner office. But they can never take your fire. Stay strong, stay focused, and never stop building. The end.